This webinar is a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, CFBNP, and the VA Maryland Healthcare System, Perry Point VA Medical Center. My name is Trulesta Pauling. I will be your moderator this afternoon. Everyone's phone has been muted. If you have a question during the presentation today, please type it in the Q&A box on the right of the screen. I will read the questions at the end of the presentation, and the presenter will provide a response. This presentation will be made available after this webinar. This is a live recording. I would like to thank Ms. Nikole Jones for this collaboration. We are grateful for your time today. But before we get started, I would like to introduce Mr. Conrad Washington. Reverend Conrad Washington serves as the director for the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Reverend Washington retired from the United States Marine Corps with 20 years of active duty service with a combat tour in 2004 in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom II. Reverend Washington is an ordained, non-denominational minister in the Christian faith and actively serving. He received his master's degree of divinity in pastoral studies from Moody Theological Seminary, Master's of Arts in Business Management from the University of Redlands, and a Bachelor's of Science degree in Education from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Mr. Washington.
Thank you, True. I appreciate it. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. As I always mentioned, there are a lot of places you could be, but you chose to stop by the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, and we appreciate that. And we believe that you'll be blessed today by the information that Ms. Nikole Jones will present. And Ms. Jones, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and sharing your subject matter expert. Because as we all know, this is a national crisis that we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to steal your thunder, ma'am, but we want to make sure that we drive home the fact that everyone needs to be aware of suicide prevention and how we all can help to combat it. So thank you all for joining. I appreciate you, and know that we have these webinars each month on a wide array of topics. I'm looking forward to you all joining us and continue to help us reach more veterans, families, and beneficiaries. So thank you all and be blessed.
Thank you, Reverend Washington. At this time, I would like to introduce Ms. Nikole Jones, who will be providing today's presentation. Please read a summary of her bio on the screen. Ms. Jones received a master's degree in social work from Howard University. She has worked in substance abuse rehabilitation program and as the inpatient psych social worker. She provides counseling, education, and community support with the goal to reduce the incidence of suicide and increase access to care. Ms. Jones has been with the VA for 23 years and 15 years in the suicide prevention program. At this time, I give you today's presenter, Ms. Nikole Jones. Ms. Jones?
Good afternoon. I'm just trying to there we go, getting fully set up here. Thank you, Ms. Pauling, for that introduction, and thank you for having me today. I just want to say it's my honor to provide these trainings, and I'll start with telling you a little personal story of how I became the suicide prevention coordinator. I actually had worked in the VA. As said, I started as an intern and working with veterans. I have 13 family members that served in some form of the service. And so I wanted to work with veterans. And during my time, I worked in substance abuse and inpatient psych. I was familiar with suicide risk and screening for suicide risk, but it wasn't until I lost my own cousin to suicide that it became something I was personally affected by, and really it created new knowledge in me. And I made suicide prevention my mission, and because I realized if I didn't see it in someone that I cared about, that our veterans and their family members wouldn't see it in them. And I wanted to be someone that provided that education so people would be prepared. So I'm going to jump right in, stop my video, and let us get right into the slides. So Before we begin, I just want to say that suicide is an intense subject for some people, especially if you have had personal experience like myself. You may be affected by this training. So just be aware of how you feel and take your own temperature. If you need to step away or take a break, I understand. I am going to remain on at the conclusion of the training, just in case anyone is uncomfortable, feeling overwhelmed and need to talk with someone. But there are some immediate resources that are available for you or anyone that you know that may be struggling. 988, which is our new, just like 911, mental health parity. We want to be able to pick up the phone and dial 988 to say that we're in a mental health emergency. And for our veterans, they can reach the Veterans Crisis Line that same way, but then pressing 1 to identify themselves as a veteran and get the support that they need. So with that said, let's go into our objectives. By participating in this training, you will gain a general knowledge of the scope of veteran suicide in the United States. You'll also gain some knowledge on how to identify veterans that may be at risk for suicide, as well as what to do if you identify a veteran at risk. So take a moment to consider, what are your biggest questions around suicide and talking to people in crisis? And feel free to share that in the comments, just, so that we are a community sharing our thoughts, because it can be a very difficult experience, whether you're a professional in that moment or whether it's a personal moment. But talking about suicide risk can be very scary. And so I wanted you to consider, what are some of your biggest fears about doing just that? I'm going to start by talking to you about some of the facts about suicide. Suicide is a national public health issue. It is a national crisis with rising rates of suicide in the general population, as well as specific populations also growing disproportionately. For every suicide death, there's approximately 135 people impacted. But think about it. That's what the research says. But I'm going to ask you, do you know just 135 people? I looked at my Facebook page in preparation for this training because I only accept friends that I actually have met before, know in some capacity. And it was 1,400 people. So you think about how many people will be affected to know that maybe that you had passed away and it was by suicide. Those many people have been affected because for them, they experienced suicide the way that I did when my cousin passed away. It's something that you never expect you would have to deal with, and you never expect to lose someone that you care about and that you know in that manner. Suicide is also a complex issue with no single cause. Suicide is often the result of a complex interaction of risk factors, protective factors that are at the individual level, the community level, and societal levels. And I'll give you an example. It may be someone who served in the military and unfortunately suffered trauma related to military sexual trauma. And so that individual is carrying those risks there. But let's say in the community, as we know there's stigma in regards to men seeking help for any kind of mental health issue, but in particular, sexual trauma. As well as at societal levels, men shouldn't cry, all of those things that happen that send us messages. And what it does is it unfortunately creates stigma around asking for help regarding suicide or any mental health issue. Risk factors are characteristics that are associated with an increased likelihood of suicidal behaviors. So a couple of risk factors would be someone having a mental health or substance abuse condition. That increases their risk. Having a handgun, owning a handgun is an increased risk. Protective factors are the things that can help us offset the risk factors. So with those risk factors in mind, if someone is engaged in treatment, that actually combats that risk. And if someone has access to handguns and they use proper storage and safe storage methods, that can also offset the risk. To prevent veteran suicides, we must maximize the protective factors while minimizing the risk factors at all levels throughout communities and nationwide, with all populations that may be at increased risk. All right, so we talked about increased risk and protective factors, but let's kind of name some of those. Some of the risk factors include prior suicide attempts. So if someone's actually crossed that threshold and made a suicide attempt, it actually makes them more likely to think about suicide as an option when facing trouble. Mental health issues. As I said, having a mental health or substance abuse condition increases the risk. Access to lethal means, we talked about those three. A recent loss, legal or financial challenges, relationship issues. A lot of the cases that we worked with, a suicide attempt came after all of these other risk factors, but it was the icing on the cake, maybe a new legal charge, a breakup of a relationship, a loss of employment. So those situational things that can happen might be the one thing that takes that person over the top. And that includes homelessness. Some of the protective factors that we can use to combat risk factors is getting them involved in treatment. So access to mental health care, a sense of connectedness. Sometimes when I'm working with veterans who may be disconnected from the military, but really enjoyed their time in the military, I encourage them to get connected to a veteran service agency or organization. Because they spend time with other veterans, they get a sense of connectedness, and it helps them feel like they belong. And that can really reduce the risk for suicide. Problem-solving skills. The more problem-solving skills they have, the better they are to face difficulties. A sense of spirituality and a mission or purpose to their life. Physical health, as well as employment being a protective factor. Also hobbies. If there's someone who really loves making, let's say, making t-shirts, or they put flower arrangements together to give to a certain group. I don't know. Whatever it is that makes them feel like they have a sense of purpose, it can be a protective factor. And social and emotional well-being too. How engaged they are socially with friends and their circles. That can also help them have resources available when they are struggling. But the major goal is to minimize risk factors and to boost protective factors. All right, so let's talk about access to lethal means as a risk factor. So this graph shows you the U.S. veterans and suicide methods, and we're comparing veterans to non-veterans, both in the United States. And you can see that with our veteran population, 72% choose a method of firearms, which is our most lethal method for suicide. And so we really, talk about guns and gun storage, handguns, safe ways of maintaining their handgun, because a lot of our veterans prefer to own handguns as a sense of their protection. But what we know is that having that firearm actually does increase the risk for suicide. So we really talk to our veterans about safe storage. Even when you look at the non-veteran population, 52% also choose firearms as a method. And most people say they choose that method because it's the most lethal. They want to ensure that they do die and that they don't suffer and become a burden to their families. So we really have to, as a nation, start talking about safe storage and common sense gun laws that really protect those who are vulnerable. This also showed you other methods that are used in suicides, but it really helps us to focus some of our attention on some of the ways in which we can intervene. And similar with firearms, even with pills, really encouraging families, veterans and their families to look into their medicine cabinets and see what old medications are in there and discard them in an effort to reduce risk. It's important. All right. So what is lethal means safety? In the context of suicide prevention, safe storage of lethal means is any action that builds time and space between a person and their thoughts of suicide and a suicide method. Effective lethal means safety education and counseling is collaborative and veteran-centered, meaning we want to find out from the veteran what method might work for them. It's not a one method of safety fits everyone. We want to talk to our veterans about what makes sense. I'll share with you a brief story. I had a Vietnam veteran who suffered with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from his time in Vietnam. He owned and legally a handgun that he chose to sleep with. It was under his pillow. We talked about how risky that was because he was also having nightmares. And we thought about what could be a method of safety that he would find acceptable. And we talked a lot about different ways. And he was even willing to invest in a particular safe that he can put his fingerprint on and actually then be able to instantly open the lockbox. And so although it wasn't something that we provided, we helped him come to a decision about which one was best for him based on his needs. And so it's really important that we just have the conversation so that veterans are aware that having the weapon in the home is a risk, but there are ways that you can reduce that. One of the reasons why this is important is there's some studies that have been done that actually look at the time between the decision to die by suicide and the action. And what this graph will show you is in less than 5 minutes, people made that decision 24% of the time. And so within 5 minutes, they thought about they made the decision and then they actually took action, which is a very short time. 48% made the decision within went from decision to action in less than 20 minutes. So we're talking about more than, half of those folks within 20 minutes time, the difference between life and death. And the biggest one, it just shows within an hour, 71% made from the decision to action in just 1 hour. And so what we know in suicide prevention is that interventions need to be immediate. And anything that can put distance between that decision and the ability to take action can actually lead to saving lives. It also is coupled with another graph that I like to show because firearm injury 90% of the time is fatal. So we're talking only 10% of the time where someone has shot themselves and survived. And I've actually met one. It was a veteran who really went on to become an advocate, showing people that short period of time between decision and action, sometimes you need a little more space between there, because he really fully regretted making that decision, and he's able to share his story with other people. So this just talks about the importance of looking at, excuse me, looking at lethal means and access to lethal means, because it just takes a few minutes between decision and action for a suicide attempt to occur. Lethal means safety, it works. Reducing access to lethal means or suicide methods is one of the few population interventions that has shown to decrease suicide rates. About 90% of those who survived a suicide attempt don't go on to die by suicide. So what we know is that if, let's say, for instance, someone has a gun, they're thinking about suicide, and their family actually removes the gun from the home, it doesn't mean that instantly that person is going to run to the medicine cabinet to find some pills to take. Now, there is a small percentage of people who do struggle more chronically with thoughts of suicide. And so they may have multiple suicide attempts. And unfortunately, with each suicide attempt, the likelihood of dying by suicide increases, because each time they'll go a little further in that attempt. And so they may start off with taking 2 Tylenol 3, but maybe on the 10th attempt, they're taking 10. And so the more attempts, the more likely that injury will occur, and it could lead to death. But if we collaborate with the veteran ahead of time, help them to, number one, anticipate a crisis, but then walk through it, survive that crisis, it is very likely that they will prevent suicide for the rest of their lives. And that's our goal. We want to teach them the skills to move through it and manage those thoughts. I always hesitate here at this slide, because having been someone who's lost 2 loved ones at this point to suicide, it's hard to swallow the fact that all suicides are preventable. But I do want people to know, if we know the information, if we know the risk factors, the warning signs, the protective factors, and resources, they can be prevented. And it's important that we have this public health approach so that everyone knows what to look for, so that when they see it, they can recognize it and actually get help for someone. Because a lot of times the person who's struggling with those thoughts, they have a difficult time verbalizing that, or, going to someone and talking about that. And so it's good when others are able to identify it and say, hey, I'm worried about you. Something doesn't feel right. Are you okay? And then you can ask that most important question, and we'll get to that. So really quickly, I'm going to touch on some common myths and some realities related to suicide. So let me go to that. All right. So the question is this a myth or is this a reality? People who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. I'll give you guys 1 second to kind of ponder that. Okay, so the reality is that that's a myth. You hear that all the time. Oh, they're just doing it for attention. And, one of the things I've learned in the 17 years now that I have been in this field of suicide prevention is that people don't want to die by suicide. They just want the pain to end. And someone who's talking about suicide is really looking for help, really looking for someone to help them through this difficulty. So it is a myth. They're not just seeking attention. They really want some kind of help. And some people talk about it in different ways. Some people say that they're suicidal because they're comfortable with, verbalizing it, but others joke around maybe about it. But it still may mean that they're struggling and just can't figure out how to address it. And so always take it seriously when someone says something about suicide, no matter what it is. Even if you have to pull them aside and say, hey, I'm worried about you. I just want to make sure you're okay, because I wasn't sure if that was a joke or if there was something really going on. Okay, so this is the answer. No matter how casually or jokingly said, suicidal threats should never be ignored and may indicate serious thoughts of suicide. Someone who talks about suicide provides others with an opportunity to intervene before the suicidal behaviors can occur. And so always take that opportunity. Here's another one. Is this a myth or reality? The only one who can help someone who's suicidal is a mental health counselor or therapist. What are your thoughts? Ponder your thoughts. The reality of this is anyone, and I've seen this in action. We've had veterans that consulted with another veteran in a treatment program about how suicidal they were. And that particular veteran, having taken a training similar to this one, said, hey, this is serious. I want to get you to someone that can help. And he escorted that veteran to a staff member and said, I think we need to do the S.A.V.E on this, my peer here, because he's struggling. And it was an awesome sight to see veteran helping another veteran. But the reality is anyone can help. Knowing the risk factors, the warning signs, and protective factors, as well as some resources. And only one you really need to know is 988, because you can get someone help immediately by dialing that. Anyone can help someone in a suicidal crisis. And so don't shy away when someone is sending those, I call them invitations. It's basically saying, I need some help here, or what are your thoughts about this? I'm struggling. When they send those invitations, it's important to just take a moment and say, hey, I'm not really good here in this subject matter, but I know someone who is, and I'll sit with you while you talk to them. So it's important that we know special training is not required to safely raise the subject of suicide and to get someone help. So always feel up to the challenge, because it really is the difference between life and death. And I remember, and I don't know if any of you have ever seen this, there's a documentary about suicide prevention around the Golden Gate Bridge. And there was a young man who's now a suicide prevention advocate named Kevin Hines, who actually jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge with thoughts to die by suicide. He's only one of 32 people to survive, and he's only one of 2 to walk again. And he travels the country and talks about his experience. And he said while he was on the bridge, he said, if anyone looked at me, smiled, and said hello, I was going to, go home, get back into treatment, and start all over again. It would be my sign that it would be okay. And he said all that time he stood waiting for someone to just see him struggling. He said he even had tears coming down his face, but no one said anything. So we have to change that and become a community where we do see people struggling and we do ask the question, because they want help. They want someone to provide some support. All right, so now we're getting to the meat and potatoes of today. It is the steps of the VA S.A.V.E. The VA S.A.V.E. is our VA gatekeeper training, and it really just talks about what you can do when someone is at risk. And this is really a veteran or non-veteran, but our focus is to help our veterans, because as mentioned, our veteran population is disproportionately represented in suicides. And so we want to combat that. And so our VA S.A.V.E. is our gatekeeper training to teach communities how to help veterans at risk for suicide. And it basically will encourage you to act with care and compassion for someone who may be struggling. And it's an acronym, the S. You want to look for the signs of suicidal thinking. So you want to recognize anything that may indicate that that person is struggling and may be thinking about suicide. The A is for ask the most important question of all. You want to ask that person, are you thinking about suicide? And we'll go into more detail about that. Validate the veteran's experience. It may not be something you understand, and you understand that you may not. Every person is different. What is enough for someone might not be enough for someone else. But you want to validate their experience just to say, look, I hear you. And it sounds like that's super overwhelming place to be, because they just want to be heard. Encourage and expedite treatment. That's our E times 2. We want to make sure to get them to someone, encourage them to get engaged in treatment, but then help them with that process. And that could mean escorting them to the emergency room if they're in a hospital setting, calling 911 or 988. If it's not an urgent issue, you can call 988 and they will help get the person connected. But if it's an emergency, you can even dial 911 because you want someone to come as soon as possible. And that's important if someone's already taken some steps towards hurting themselves. All right, so let's jump in. Knowing the signs of suicidal thinking. You want to learn to recognize these signs. Someone experiencing or verbalizing hopelessness, feeling like they have no way out. If they're experiencing agitation, anxiety. Sleeplessness is a big one. I always circle that one and encourage people to listen for sleeplessness, especially with our veteran population, because some of our veterans are comfortable coming in and talking about their inability to sleep, but they may not be as comfortable talking about depression, their post-traumatic stress disorder, or anxiety. But sleeplessness is a big one, and it may be the nugget that you can kind of use to encourage them to stay connected, because a lack of sleep will definitely have an impact on depression, an impact on PTSD, an impact on anxiety, and certainly could lead to suicidal thinking. Someone who feels like they have no reason to live, they have rage or anger. If they're engaging in risky behaviors without thinking. We had a veteran once who presented to our emergency room. 3 of his buddies had escorted him there because they were sitting around drinking, and this particular veteran pulled out his legally possessed handgun and put 1 bullet in, spun it, and wanted to play I got my air quotes up, play Russian roulette. And his friends immediately recognized that this was not funny, and they were concerned about him and his well-being. And so they were able to get the weapon from him, take the bullet out, and actually escorted him to the emergency room. He didn't see anything wrong with it, but it was engaging in risky behavior that could lead to death, that he was really kind of like, oh, well, if it happens, it happens. And so it's important that we look at that kind of behavior as well. Increase alcohol use and drug use, and someone who's withdrawing from their family or friends. Those are signs of suicidal thinking. There may be something going on, and it's okay to ask, is everything okay for that person? And then even asking that most important question, are you thinking about suicide? The presence of any of the following requires immediate attention. And that would mean walking someone down to an emergency room, taking them to a hospital. If they have thoughts of hurting or killing themselves in the moment, they're looking for ways to die or have secured a way, like maybe they've gotten some pills or put in for the purchase of a weapon. someone who's talking about death, dying, or suicide, and I even include writing and posting. We're in a new era of technology, and unfortunately, there have been people who have written a suicide note on Facebook, live streamed a suicide attempt. And so we have to think about social media and ways in which that also can be an indication of someone's risk. I've seen in action Facebook work. They have some protections involved if some of the participants on the app are speaking about suicide. They have some programs involved that actually reach out to people to be able to provide some intervention on Facebook, which I thought was really amazing. But we have to think about social media and posting thoughts of death on the internet because this is our new normal. Also, self-destructive and risk-taking behavior when it involves alcohol, drugs, or weapons. Any of that behavior, it really requires immediate attention. All right, and with that said, once we've identified those signs of suicidal thinking, it's important we move to that A, which is asking the question. And there are different ways to ask, and there's no right or wrong way. You have to find what's comfortable for you. It could be as simple as, are you thinking about killing yourself? Some people like to say, are you having thoughts of harming yourself? I would be, that's not a wrong way to say it, but you have to ask what you're wanting to know. Some people do cut so that they hurt themselves, but they don't want to die by suicide. And so you want to make sure that you're getting to the specific question of suicide. You do want to ask it if you identified those warning signs. You do want to ask it in a natural and normal way. I usually say something like, "Oh, Mr. Smith, I'm so sorry to hear that you're going through such a difficult time. I know when I've worked with veterans in the past who've had similar issues like you have, unfortunately, they thought about suicide because they felt like they had no way out. Is that something that you thought about?" Because you want it to be natural. You want them to not be alarmed, and you don't have to stop the conversation. Like Mr. Smith, are you thinking about suicide? It's not a reprimand. It's a compassionate question to help them. You don't want to ask it as if you're looking for a no answer. "Mr. Smith, you're not thinking about suicide, are you?" Because you're basically saying, I don't know if I want to hear if the answer is yes. And most likely, Mr. Smith is not going to tell you yes if you ask that way. And you also don't want to ask the question when someone is packing up to leave at the end of the session. It needs to be something given adequate time in case that individual needs that support. Maybe just needs to talk it through. Maybe they are not at immediate risk, but this is something that they've been really struggling with, and they're ready to talk about it and get some support for it. You want to make sure there's ample time for that. Just some check-in questions for practice. We don't really have the time to go into, but I want you to think about, what are your thoughts that you have about asking the question? And if you do have any specific questions, if they're not answered when we come to the end, I will make sure to follow up with you. So if you have something specifically that you want to know about interacting with someone at risk, please put it in the chat, and I'll make sure that we do get back. But it's important that you have that debate with yourself. What are my concerns about sitting down with someone who may be suicidal? Are there emotions that are my own that I have to keep in check? Do I need to know the resources that are available? And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But it's important to think about, what are your feelings about this work? Because we have to be confident and competent to be able to help someone in a crisis. All right, so our V is validation. Talk openly about suicide. I always talk to my veterans like suicide is the same as diabetes, because it really is. It's something that is physically affecting your body and your mind, and you need help for it. And so I will call a veteran and I say, "Hey, Mr. Smith, how you doing today?" "Oh, okay. How's your blood glucose?" "Oh, okay, good. Did you eat a good meal today?" "Oh, okay. And are you having any thoughts of suicide?" Because I want them to feel like it's natural. If we don't talk about it and make it normal, then it's going to feel unnatural and people are going to feel uncomfortable about it. Be willing to listen and let the veteran express their feelings. Recognize that it's serious and you don't want to pass judgment, because we never know what would be our enough. And so in that moment, just be compassionate. And although you don't want them to take their life or think about taking their life, you have to give them the permission to express it where they are in that moment so that they can get the help that they need. And reassure them that help is available and that they don't have to feel alone, number one, but number two, they don't have to go through this alone, that there's help. All right. So the validation, checking in, a validating statement. You want to, everything. "I'm so sorry that everything is so hard right now." Something validating to let them know that you understand. You may not have those same emotions or feelings or issues, but in that moment, you understand what they're saying and you can relate. All right. So the E, encouraging and expediting. What should I do if I think someone is suicidal? Don't keep the secret. Sometimes people will say, "I want to tell you something in confidence." And I always give this my personal disclaimer. "Hey, I care too much about you. If something is going to affect your health or your well-being or the health or well-being of anyone else, I've got to take action." And that's like my disclaimer to let them know, you can tell me, but if it's related to hurt or harm to anyone, I'm going to make sure that everyone is okay. I'm going to do my best to keep you safe. If they've already expressed suicidal thoughts, you don't want to say, "Oh, let me go get my supervisor," and leave them in the office. You want to call your supervisor to your office or have them come to you, because you want that person to feel like they're not alone. Sometimes those thoughts of self-harm can be, what's the word? It can be impulsive. And so they may be sitting in someone's office looking right there on their desk for something to hurt themselves. So it's important to safe-proof your desk, but also it's important to not leave someone who's expressed that thought for harm alone. Okay? And try to get them to seek help immediately by calling 988. If it's an emergency and you need someone there urgently, calling 911 is important. Excuse me. All right, I had to take a second for a drink. All right. When talking to a veteran at risk for suicide, you want to remain calm. Listen more than you speak. Let them talk. Sometimes if the veteran is able to talk himself through the emotions, they also get to a place where they understand they don't want to die. They just want things to get better. And they even come to the realization that they need help sometimes. So let them talk it through and be a listening ear. You want to maintain eye contact. You want to act with confidence. You don't want to argue. Use open body language. Like, you don't want to stand with or sit with your arms folded or even hiding behind your computer. Make sure there's a direct line to that veteran and eye contact so that they know that you're in this with them. Limit the questions. Let them do most of the talking, but use supportive and encouraging comments. And for me, it's important to be honest. Excuse me. Sometimes our veterans are going through a lot. They have a lot of issues going on. And so there may not be a quick solution. Sometimes it may be, I will ask the veteran, you know, with all of this going on, if we could identify one or two things that would make you feel most hopeful about the future, what would that be? And it's interesting because the veteran may be homeless, they may have, you know, no income, but the two things on their list would be, well, I want to get in contact with my, you know, my daughter, my adult daughter I haven't talked to in a while, you know, something tangible that you didn't expect. And so sometimes it's important to say, you know, there are no quick solutions, but what can we do in this moment? All right, we're going to skip the practice session, but I do, you know, when we have this in person, we actually do have a practice session, have someone pretend to be or in the role of a veteran and someone in the provider, and they actually go through the S.A.V.E. where they're asking for the you know, asking if they're experiencing any of the symptoms. They ask the question, they validate, and then they offer that support. And so it's important to kind of walk yourself mentally through it, and even use this as a guide. You know, you can put it, save up on your desktop so that when you have someone that may be at risk, it reminds you of what to do. So the signs of suicidal thinking, you want to know what was them, what were they? Sorry about that. And what did you notice about your ask? So this is just kind of the practice, going back and listening to the role play. Sometimes when you have these interactions with real clients, real veterans, you may need to debrief after and ask yourself these questions to really build your confidence with working through that. Like I said, debriefing is important for really identifying how you feel, what are your thoughts, and how the exercise or the interaction actually went. And then I'm going to go over now, in conclusion, some of the resources that are important for folks to be aware of. If you're not aware, we do have a Veterans Crisis Line. It's free, it's confidential, it's 24/7, 365 support for our veterans. A lot of people don't know that it's also for service members if they want to call. Family members can call if they're concerned about a veteran, and friends of veterans can call. So if someone that you know is a veteran but not really interested in getting treatment, or you know, really resistant to the idea of going to the VA or anywhere, you know, that might be something that a friend or family member can then call and get some more information so that they can help that veteran. They can call, they can chat on the veteranscrisisline.net, and they even have text. So now with smartphones, if someone were to dial 838-255, they can actually start communicating with a responder who can help them look for resources. This is just a quick timeline of how the work that we've done in the program over this 15 to 16 year period. The most important one I'll point out is 313,000 dispatches of emergency services for veterans that reported being in the midst of or about to make a suicide attempt. So we were able in those cases to save a life, which is most important. We also have a locator for all of our VA SPCs. That's our suicide prevention coordinators, which is my role here in Maryland. But we want to make sure that anyone across the country, if they need to get connected to a resource at the VA under suicide prevention, they can actually use the veteranscrisisline.net resource locator to find a team in their area. And it just shows you how to do that. Some other resources that are available. Don't Wait, Reach Out is a great one. It's under the VA's website. It just talks about the resources for veterans, making the connection. These are all resources that are great for veterans and their families to really identify some of the important things that they should be considering if they have a loved one at risk for suicide. This talks about keepingitsecure.net. It's a safe storage safe storage website. It talks about how to keep medications, firearms, and other lethal means safe. And so that's a nice resource as well. We have brochures that we can provide, some specific resources for our LGBTQ plus community, some apps. So this is a great, and you're going to get this copy of these, the PowerPoint, and it'll have the resources in the back. This is also a great app that I encourage all veterans to have, especially if they have a safety plan. They can actually load it to their smartphone. So this is a nice way to share this with our veteran population. Also, too, if you're working in any capacity with a veteran that may be at risk for suicide, there's an additional resource that is available. This is from our VISN 19, our MyRIC. It's the mental health research wing of our VA. And they actually can talk to you about a case. You can give them information about the veteran and their risk for suicide, and they'll help you formulate a plan, some strategies, things like that that can be helpful. All right, so I'm just gonna this is another one I wanted to just highlight. This training, the full version, is available also through Psych Armor Institute. This is a partnership with the VA where we want to make sure that providers in the community have this VA gatekeeper training. And so with our partnership with Psych Armor, we offer it for free. And so you can actually log on. It's about 25 minutes long, and it will give you credit for this course. And it goes over a lot of the things that I've discussed, but it will go into it a little more deeply. And then just to stay connected, some of our socials and websites. But now I guess we're at questions.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, for that wealth of information. We have one question right now. We're going to go into the Q&A section. I'm going to read the questions out loud and the person's name that asked the question. And I will ask you to provide a response. If we're unable to get around to all the questions today, we'll take down your question. We have your email address and we'll get back to you. Ms. Jones will get back to you in a day or two. First question comes from Katie. Her question is there a safety concern if law enforcement is dispatched?
Yeah, there always are concerns when law enforcement is dispatched. And that's why a lot of communities are now having teams of mental health providers that actually go out with our police officers because they want a mental health provider on site. One of the things also that our suicide prevention team does across the country, we do it here in Maryland, the DMV area, but we actually go out to the police departments and train them, doing this same gatekeeper training, talking to them about coming to the home of a veteran and what things to look for and be mindful of that may be different from the general population. I shared at the beginning that I had one family member that died by suicide that got me into this work. What I didn't share is that since then we had another family member who was struggling and police were called to the home for protection. And unfortunately, he died at the hands of police. But I understand it's a very difficult job when you're going there to provide support for someone who is thinking about harming themselves, because they could be at risk for harming the service members, the first responders as well. And so it's very delicate. But what our team does is we try to train our veterans. I try to train our police officers, and we try to educate our veterans too about what they can do to make it a little bit easier. We even talk them through it if we have to call for 911 and the police will arrive and there's no mental health provider, we might stay on the phone with the veteran and say, we'll walk you through it. And we'll have a team member on the phone with the police, actually helping them to provide, safe intervention as well.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. If you need to reach out to Ms. Jones, please see her point of contact information on the screen. You can also reach out to our team. Our point of contact information will be on the screen in just a second. At this time, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Reverend Washington, who will provide some closing remarks.
Thanks, True. Nikole, thank you, ma'am. Awesome brief. Once again, we appreciate you taking time. Great information, and thank you for sharing your personal testimony. That's always touching and helps us understand your journey as well. So we appreciate you. Well, hey, look, thank you all for joining us here at the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. That's a mouthful. We'll be back, same station, same channel, in a couple of weeks, doing it again. So be blessed and take care of yourselves. Stay cool.
If you registered for this webinar, we will provide you with today's presentation. A recording of this webinar will be provided on our website at a later date. Please subscribe to our website and Facebook for future webinars and sharing of information. This adjourns today's webinar. Thank you, and thank you for joining us today. Goodbye.